Good evening, everybody. It is another book club live, and we are so happy to have you joining us from Facebook and YouTube. So excited tonight because tonight is going to be a special book club. We've got author Lerato Mogoatlhe with us, and she is the author of Vagabond, Wandering Through Africa on Faith. And we are so excited to have her here because she is so passionate and enthusiastic and so funny, and she's got stories for days. So I don't even know how we're going to pack it in the next 45 minutes. But before we start, as is my custom, we will begin with a quote from an African writer. And today's quote captures everything that Lorato is about, and everything that she writes about. And it's a quote by Aminata Fauna, who is the author of The Memory of Love. And the quote is, "If you want to know a country, read its writers." And I would say, if you want to know Africa, read Vagabond, Wandering Through Africa on Faith. I think it's just as good as reading its writers. And in the book, you'll find that the author has actually read many of the African writers from the countries she visits, as well as chronicled the music from those countries, as well as the food, as well as the real life characters that she paints through her travel memoir. So welcome, Lerato. We're so happy to have you here tonight with us.
Thank you so much, Selena. I was like, who's this girl you're talking about? Is it me? Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here. It's a wonderful way to spend a Tuesday. Is it Wednesday? See, lockdown. Still don't know my Monday from my Wednesday, August from July, but we'll get.
I love how you are wrapped up in your colorful blanket. It's like a Maasai blanket, looks like, and you just look cozy and warm. I've also got a blanket on my knees. Like, it's starting to get really cold, and the winters these days in Southern Africa are just getting more bitter as the years go by. And while I'm hoping it's not me getting older. But it's actually the actual climate changing. Okay, so for our viewers joining us on YouTube and Facebook, let's dig into finding a little bit about who is Lorato. She's an author, TEDx speaker, travel and editorial writer, and entrepreneur. She's been traveling around Africa for over a decade, writing and documenting the content beyond its stereotypes. Her work has been published in City Press, Sunday Times, AA Traveler, Hercules Spain, Africa Report, Mail and Guardian, and many more. And her travel memoir, which is the subject of tonight's live, Vagabond, Wandering Through Africa on Faith, is based on the 5 years she spent living around Africa, sort of mid-2000s, and its impact has been compared to Eat, Pray, Love by the Sunday Times. What is Vagabond? What can you expect? It's poetic, it's raw, it's honest, it's colorful. And from meeting President Becky at an event in Timbuktu to hanging out with one of her favorite artists, Habib Koite, Vagabond is a love letter of Lorato's discovery of herself, her home, and Africa. And you guys have to read this book. I've been reading it since about Saturday, and I have been struck by Lorato's very unique, frank, but also colorful voice, and the ocean of emotions as she describes herself. So before we get into the book, let's get into the writer. Lorato, who is the real Lorato? We've heard all of this stuff about you being a speaker and a writer and all of this amazing stuff, but at heart, who is the true Lorato?
I think at heart, I'm really just a woman with a story to tell and a point of view that I believe in so much that I will tell it by all means necessary. I quit my life and my job, and at some points I was living on peanuts for a week because I was so broke. One time in Ghana, I lived on plantains for 2.5 weeks because I was so broke. But I would do all of those things just to prove my point of view, right? So fortunately, I don't have to live on peanuts and plantain anymore now. But it really still remains the same. I'm very passionate. I'm very, very much obsessed about Africa, as someone once called me. And I love this continent, and I feel so close to it as a Black person, as an African person. This is where I've always lived, where I was born and bred, where my dreams were nurtured, right? My life ends and begins in Africa. So because of that, I feel so strongly tied to the continent's narrative and particularly shifting it so that the perception of Africa that we have of ourselves as Africans, that the world has of us as Africans, is one that's authentic, rooted in reality, that is anchored by human dignity, and really just shows human beings um, instead of like, I'm looking for the right English word, instead of I feel that sometimes when people write about Africa, even African writers, when people write nonfiction work about Africa, characters tend to be exactly that. They're not human beings, they are a means to an end. I feel like you're not really seeing people in the story. And even in the beginning of the book, I think I was doing that, right? But my writing improved over time, and I got to be able to start, being able to call myself out and expecting and demanding better of myself as someone telling the stories of Africa. That's me in a nutshell.
That's great. And that is great. That's awesome. So, I just wanted to, before you go on, I wanted to, something that I thought that was so special about your book was the dedication, because I think it captures a lot of what you just said now about what you wanted this journey through Africa to be for people and what it meant for you and how it captured who you really are. And the dedication reads like this: the freedom to wander from place to place and the possibility of knowing the world beyond what's around my corner is a seed planted by my maternal grandmother, Basetsana Mary Malebane, and my paternal grandfather, Rwanswai Gabriel Mogoatlhe, who could only travel in their dreams. I dedicate Vagabond to them. I thought that was so poetic and so beautiful. The fact that we travel in our dreams, but also just the fact that that seed that started as a dream manifested in what you did. And I think it's so powerful and so profound that you then documented it in this really colorful, amazing book. So, Lerato, tell us about why this book, how this book came about, and what that process was like for you.
Started traveling because I've always worked as a journalist. I think, oh, I'm on mute. Okay. Because I've always worked as a journalist, I was really always going to write my story, right? I was going to tell it beyond just um a blog that I had when I was traveling, beyond the articles that I was writing. I was going to turn it into a book and make it into an account of what it means to just be at home. Because for me, above everything else, Africa is first and foremost home. So I wanted it to literally have the same effect as going to my grandmother's house or my grandfather's house had they still been alive. I would go, I would be curious, I would bring my individuality, but I wouldn't project that on myself. And this matters so much with traveling Africa, because often a lot of people say, oh, I went to such and such a destination, it was great, but it was so slow. I went to such and such a place, it was so great, but there was traffic jams, right? So I feel that often when people think about Africa as a destination and as a travel experience, people put it under a microscope and do not tolerate things that they put up with daily in their own lives. We all struggle with traffic jams, right? But if it catches you in Kampala, catastrophe, you cannot possibly go to Kampala because heaven forbid the traffic. And so it goes. So I really wanted to create a book that was for us. Me, I'm glad that Vagabond is a book that resonates with everyone. But when I was writing Vagabond, when I was visualizing people holding Vagabond in their hands, they were always Black and African.
So that is like the comparison of home and then traveling through like a traveler is so deep. We've got some viewers that have joined us from Facebook and YouTube. We want to say hi to Sappy and hi to Mr. Fungai Anthony Socks. It is a captivating blurb indeed. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much, Fungai. And you can actually get a copy of the book on Kindle on Amazon if you just want to try that in terms of looking to get a copy. and or get one brought up from South Africa through one of the bookstores if you really enjoy hard copy like I do. So, Lerato, what was the publishing process like? Because you got published a fairly you got published by a fairly traditional publisher in terms of Jacana Media. I know that they do have a few imprints, but that was kudos to you getting trade published, and it was a travel memoir, which is kind of niche. How did that all come about? How did it move from blogs and freelance writing and pieces to then now what you had always dreamed about, this book, through the trade publishing process?
When I was working on the manuscript, I mean, I'm a very clinical person about my writing, so I knew that I had the emotion, I had the pictures. Like I was like, it's a good story to tell, right? And it's a story that's really told by Africans, particularly African women. So I started looking for a publisher, and it turns out that publishing is so rude. Everyone takes 3 to 6 months, if at all, to respond to you. I find that very rude. They're like, we're busy. No one is that busy. Let me tell you, I know these people offline. No one is that busy. No one is that self-important. But anyway, it is the industry standard. So what happened was that what separated Jacana from every other company that I was engaging with in the beginning of this process was that Jacana is very responsive, and they will engage with you. And they have an open call once a year. You can submit your manuscript beyond their usual submission channels. They have several opportunities throughout the year, right? But the one that I accessed was one that's almost like a Dragon Den style pitching session. You send in your manuscript, you answer a few questions. If you make to the shortlist, you meet a panel, and then you take it from there. While we're in that panel, one of the lady now, Blackbird Books, it has now gone independent. At that time, it was an imprint, and Tabiso was also in the room. So we just started talking and took that conversation offline. I gave him a manuscript, we signed a contract, and then if you want to write a book, shock and horror, she looks at it and said, oh, your book is crap. It's horrible. Your manuscript is horrible. Go back to the drawing board and now go write a book. You're just telling a story now. Just go write a book. And what she meant by that was, I think often a lot of people who tell stories especially make this mistake. Because you're used to telling stories, you might not be aware of the platform, right? And how you tell a story on that platform. And for me, even though I know this thing about platforms so well, because it's literally, this is my training as a journalist, I neglected that. And she said that she felt that even though the story was good, I would at times not tell the reader enough, and I would not really show a few layers. And one thing that I know that definitely helped working with an experienced publisher is that I sort of started thinking, let me just try being a little bit vulnerable, right? And try to just, like, sharing the Kevin incident, for instance, which would normally be so hard for me. And it helped because it connected me to other people within the publishing ecosystem itself. There are people who are publicists, there are people who are editors, there are people who are proofreaders, and all these and designers, and all these people are so important in making a book come together. Which brings me to this next point. We all have a story. We really all have a story. But by gosh, respect your audience and tell your story properly. You're a writer, but a writer is not a journalist. Even if you have edited, a writer is not an editor. Even if you have edited 10,000 other books, you cannot edit yours. Let someone else do it. You might be a graphic designer and doing amazing work, but your best friend who's not a book designer cannot design your book unless they are going to hit the mark with the design. If you do that, I believe we will be able to make sure that a lot of the stories that remain untold get to see the light of day, because ultimately, and this is definitely true about publishing in South Africa and true about every industry in South Africa, there's whiteness, there's gatekeeping, there's anti-blackness to it. If we call it with its real name, right? There's an anti-blackness, there's remnants of colonialism and apartheid thinking. Things are what they are. You cannot be in a room in a country that has a majority of Black people and not have a lot of Black people and not think there's something normal with that, right? You cannot walk into a shop in an African country that sells book and go to buy books and not think there's something abnormal with not finding, with that space not being a reflection of the majority. So those are the dynamics of some of the dynamics of publishing in South Africa, and I bet in a few other places on the continent that still have a lot of obvious colonial hangovers. The way to get over that is to also take our stories and turn them into professional and compelling products, because we are telling them, we are writing, but we are treating literature and books, something so important that is part of a very long and fine tradition, into a high school newsletter pamphlet. And then we like get our friends to prove, or you know what I mean. So as you can tell, I'm spicy.
Oh, wow. Wow. So that's really powerful. And I love everything that you have said there, about just getting it done professionally, taking it seriously, respecting the reader, and understanding that our stories are important and we can no longer allow us to not be visible on the bookshelves as authors and writers, and not be visible even within the publishing industry as people who are now also taking the keys from the previous white or colonialist gatekeepers and opening up, those channels and those routes for others. So well done and very powerful. And I hope that those of you who are watching who do have aspirations to publish your books have really picked up quite some candid but very truthful and very inspiring, really practical advice in terms of how you can go about the publishing process. So now, getting into the book Vagabond, right? What surprised you in terms of the reviews and impact that the book has had in the market space and on readers? One of the things that I mentioned earlier is the Sunday Times compared the book to Eat, Pray, Love. And what was that like for you?
Strange. It was very strange. I hate comparisons, but particularly hate comparisons to white women and Americans, be they African American or not, because we we just not the same, right? And by we are just not the same, I mean, I was not traveling as someone who was very privileged, who had networks that would carry me over to live in these countries that I traveled, right? I actually made a decision to quit a career at a stage when someone was actually headhunting me for a great and exciting role and organization. And then I also was freelancing for the first time, and journalism pays horribly, especially if you are writing for African publications. My God, it is scandalous. It pays horribly, right? So I was doing that because I chose to not let anything be a deterrent. I believe that African stories should be told by Africans, and not only should they be told by Africans. When we are telling these stories, we should be conscious about what it means to tell a story. Why as a storyteller do I frame my stories in a particular way? Why is it that as a storyteller who's telling African stories, when I step out in New York, I'm in awe. I haven't seen anything. I've just stepped out. I've seen a yellow cab. I'm in awe. But when I step out in Bujumbura, I'm disgusted. I'm picking up, or let me rather say Addis Ababa, because I remember once reading a travelogue that upset me greatly. When you're stepping out in Addis Ababa, you are picking up poverty, you are seeing homeless people, but these are not African experiences, they're universal experiences, but when it's about telling African stories, it doesn't matter what you're saying, you must include poverty, you must include corruption, you must include bad leadership, conflict, and so on. And that frustrates me because it's not the real story of Africa. It's not nuanced, it's not detailed, it's not rich, it's not authentic, and it robs us as Africans of the opportunity to know ourselves beyond just what we know from mainstream media, beyond the literature that we know about the continent that has been produced by colonizers that continues to be produced by people who travel with a colonial mindset. Case in point, recently, I saw a video on Instagram. It was made by someone who produces travel content, and I followed them and followed them now. I followed them because their page was colorful, it was dynamic, I enjoyed it. And then next thing, they're putting content. I think they were in Kenya or Tanzania. They're not African. And they're at an orphanage helping poor people. I'm like, but wait a second. There are people starving right where you come from. You know, there are kids right where you come from who could use a meal that you need to go and fucking advocate for, instead of coming here and turning us into yet another picture and yet another stereotype of poverty. That is my biggest problem. And I think, you know, when Maya Angelou says, write the book you want to see, I'm like, let's all write the books we want to see. And there must be books that start standing in the gap and the space of African literature that has been produced by racist colonizers, white supremacists, misogynists, and all these people who do not see us who other Africans. And as African story writers, as African storytellers, if we do not engage with the nature and the environment in which we tell stories, then we also are the Africans in our own storytelling, right? I'll make an example, no names ever. I'll make an example. I read a book. It wasn't a book or a travel story, but it was travel. I read it. It was written by a South African, and they were picking up the poverty so much wherever they were said, you know. But because I also knew them as well, I was shocked. I was like, but we come from Pretoria. We come from the same area and same space. You are literally describing where we grew up. So why does it shock you? Why does it disgust you? Why is it so important for you to center it when you're speaking about Ethiopians, for example, when you're speaking about Burundians? But when you speak about yourself, when you speak about South Africans, you see that you need to humanize that story and not center the poverty and socioeconomic conditions and so on. So it's always interesting writing Africa. I can debate this the whole day. I can go on.
It is important for it to be debated. It is important for us to have the conversation about our narrative point of view as writers and authors. Are we taking on a gaze that is authentic and that's real, or are we just perpetuating and mimicking a gaze that has been passed on by a system of colonialism? Because we can't ever run away from the fact that many of us, I think, especially if we're looking at the top tier of millennials, are still were caught up in the hangover or still part of a colonial educational system, which perpetuated the continuation of that narrative point of view and voice and storytelling voice that did other, that only wanted there to be one story about a dark Africa, a poor Africa, a disabled Africa. What was so this brings me to something else that I noticed about the book. You know, I always found, until I started reading the book, I found the title Vagabond a little bit disconcerting and disquieting, because I was like, well, what are we saying there? And then I read the book and saw how you were really traveling at a grassroots level. And in terms of now your African readers and African reviewers, a lot of people really loved that because they felt like they were there in the places, and that there was a wondering element to the way that you traveled in a very grassroots, I'm going to do this like a citizen of Africa, as opposed to an external observer, or to come and surveil and cast a gaze that is othering. So what was that like in terms of that, just throwing caution to the winds and just being a vagabond, the experience of wandering?
I was broke a lot. And I think when you're broke, you run out of options. So like from the get-go, I ran out of money in Senegal, and you have to like trust and depend on people. So that helped, because normally really my sense of independence would have like completely prevented me from, you know, asking for any sort of help, right? So the first thing I do on this big trip that I'm doing by myself, traveling for the first time, is to ask for help. But what that did was connect me to people. And on my second day of arrival in Dakar, someone said to me, whatever happens, and I wasn't broke at this stage, they were just making conversation. He said to me, in your travels, you must just always remember that here you are home and you'll never want for anything. And that really helped, because I opened I traveled with an open mind, with an open heart, with an open spirit. And this is so important, because again, when you travel Africa, my favorite thing about the continent is that despite all the beauty, despite all the rich heritage and history and dynamism of how we live, right, and who we are as a people, the best thing about Africa is actually the spirit of the people, the kindness, the generosity, the simplicity of love, right? It's not transactional. It's not, no one cares. Really, no one cares who you are, right? They care that you're a person. It's defined as that you're a person. So people will invite you to their house. People will literally run down the street to invite me to eat at their houses. People will see me eat. I've just finished eating at a restaurant. I'm clearly not hungry, but they would want me to come and eat with them, because they will refuse to eat if I'm not eating. And people would say to me, I can't believe you're staying at a hotel. You must come stay at my house. Here's my phone number. Next time you're in town, call me. You have a home. And I would not keep in touch, because I suck at keeping in touch that consistently. I'm becoming better, but I really suck at it. And I would show up, right, a year later and be like, oh, you said the next time I'm in Bamako, I have a place to stay. And they would say, yes, of course, you're welcome, And it really went on like that. Other people would say, someone I met who was from Benin, I think, and Togo, they were living in Mali at the time, said, well, I won't be there, but here are my people's details. You just call and just say, I sent you. And you do that because you want to see, right? Will it really happen? Can I really travel by word of mouth on generosity? I show up with a letter because it's written in a language that I don't speak half the time. And the letter just says, oh, here's a Lerato. Just give a place to stay. And it tells who I am. And truly, that's what happened. And I think that was the thing that made my journeys so special to me. It's not that I got to go to all these countries and do all these things. It's that I was loved. And that love was absolute. It was secure, and it was unconditional. It was not dependent on my achievements. It was not dependent on my name. It was not dependent on who I've hung out with. That includes Beyonce and John Legend people. It just was, you are here, you have arrived, and feel at home. And in fact, after when I came back from Sudan, I said to my mom, mom, you really, really suck. And I think it's a Southern African mother's thing and a Southern African thing. When you sit on the couch at home, you must sit proper. You can't put your feet up on a couch. You can't relax, because you must always sit like a robot on it. And I got to a place in Sudan called Dongola, and the guy that I was traveling with, I hired his car so he could ferry me around. On our way back to the hotel, he said, oh, let's stop at my sister's house to say hello. I get to the sister's house. The first thing the sister says is, would you like a hot shower? And that would have meant going to boil the water. And I appreciated that, because Sudan is hot during the day, but at night it gets quite chilly because it's in the desert, and Dongola in particular was quite chilly. So I appreciated that if I wanted to have a bath, I could have it. And then offered me tea and brought like a whole lot of sweets. I don't get that about Sudan. People give you, like, you're one visitor, people give you like a tray of sweets and dates and biscuits. Someone gave them to me as food to carry for the road, and it lasted me 2.5 weeks, and I was sharing it with other people. And when I said like this, because I wasn't living on the road anymore, so I still have to transition between Lerato in South Africa and Lerato on the road, right? And I was sitting like this on the couch, and she said, no, you can't sit like that. Here's a blanket, put your feet up, relax. And I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what speaks to me. That sense of being so at home and relaxing and putting your feet up. It's home, enjoy, And I love that. And it's funny. I always I always like tease my mom about things when I come back from my travels, like, oh, you will not believe that people who literally enjoy their homes versus look at them, or you will not believe that people who do A, B, C, D, E versus the other, you know. But I think it comes from good humor, but also speaks a lot about, you know, for me, ultimately, traveling is just stripped down. It makes me feel like a child who's excited. The same way I felt when I was 8 or 9 and I saw, well, not with my own eyes, but like in class, our teacher taught us about ancient Egypt, and I saw a poster of the pyramids and the Sphinx, and thinking to myself, are these things really real? These things really exist? I need to see them. This is going to be my life. That just that base feeling of curiosity and that excitement of discovery and arrival, for me, it's the all-encompassing, I guess, takeaway from my travels, all-encompassing way, if I were to define it, of how I travel. I travel with my body, I travel with my emotions, I travel with my mind, but I also have to bring my soul as well, because that is the difference between being away for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, and moments, and experiences that turn themselves into a moment in time.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, that's so powerful. The faith that you found, because you know the subtitle to the book is "Wandering Through Africa on Faith," and I think if you can feel that kind of love, then that is the epitome of faith being fulfilled. And so, you know, that's really special what you shared about what Africa is like. And when we're looking grassroots beneath glossy hotels and glossy magazine covers, because there's an aspect to which Africa has been commodified and commercialized from a tourist perspective. But before we run out of time, there's just one last thing I wanna ask you about the book. So the book is layered in different kinds of languages. You take us through the countries by the musicians. So every country, when you're setting up the scene fairly early on, you tell us your first impressions in terms of the music you knew about it, then the musical artists you knew about it. Then there is the food. So in Dakar, we you know the rice dish with the peanut sauce stew. That you were constantly avoiding. But then, you know, in Bamako, the way that, you know, people always serving up fish, I mean, chips and chicken, but also like the bunny chow type rolls. You give these exquisite descriptions from street stalls to cafes to little restaurants and little homestay, almost B&Bs, the food that was being served up. And then there's the books. You also tell us about the writers that you knew of or had read from each country. And then what I found interesting is this phrase that pops up in the book that also showed that people were reading you and the country you were from using the same language. And that is this iconic phrase, and you have to read the book to unpack the whole thing around it. Who killed Lucky Dube? And when I read that, I could not stop laughing. I literally laughed out loud how that question followed you. Tell me a little bit about the making that choice to use those languages or those layers of languages to color your experiences.
I wanted to make a connection. I wanted the reader to have a connection to the continent as a physical place, but I also wanted it to be something that you experience. You read these destinations and hopefully you imagine yourself in them and you want to travel, inspired to travel Africa. But right now, you can listen to music, right? If all you know about Mali is that the capital city is Bamako or Timbuktu is from somewhere there. Right now, you can listen to the music, you know, because I've referenced it here. Right now, you can step out if you live in a place that has an Afropolitan identity. and look for Ethiopian food and find it, or Senegalese food, and so on. And you can also step out and go wear the clothes, buy Ankara and wear the clothes. And that's because I wanted music and food and literature are how I travel. Before I went to any other place, before I could travel physically, before I could afford traveling, before I even realized that I have wanderlust, I was traveling through books, through food, and through music. There's such an instant and accessible connection to places. And also their basic instincts. We all get hungry. We all are curious about something or the other. And we all love music. So it became a way for me to connect to the places that I dreamt about traveling to. It became an inspiration. And secondly, I wanted to share that because I didn't want Vagabond to leave you wanting, right? Yeah, I want you to book a trip to anywhere on the continent after you've read Vagabond. But by leave you wanting, I mean leave you unable to connect with the book unless you go to a place I've written about. I want you to taste Ghana, and that you can do by just going where there's a Ghanaian restaurant versus having to travel to Accra. I just wanted relatability. I wanted connection. I wanted home. I wanted a sense of ease about traveling Africa. I wanted to have a sense of safety, of comfort about traveling this continent. And someone laughed at me when I said to them a few weeks ago, it's literally the easiest thing I have done, because also there's this stereotypes that it's difficult to travel the continent, that the continent isn't connected. Africa is connected. I traveled by public transport 99.9% of the time, and I moved. When you're in one region, in one country, in a specific region, you're as good as connected to all the other countries in that region, unless there has been a fundamental disturbance in peace and logistics. So that's really ultimately what I wanted to do, for you to walk away and have a new memory of Lucky Dube, right? I bet now when you hear Lucky Dube's song, it's no longer just a Lucky Dube song, right? You're like, she said she was at Labadi Beach. They played this song and the deal was sealed for her. She's quitting her life and everything to travel to Accra again.
Definitely, especially those chapters where you're in Ghana. Wow. So if you want to know the Lucky Dube thread, and the many ways he shows up in the book, you've got to read this book. And especially right now, because we've had rolling lockdowns all across Africa, right? In response to the COVID pandemic, I couldn't think of a better way to settle any languishing or wanderlust in your own heart right now. If you can't travel, then reading this book, make it leisurely, do it chapter by chapter, listen to the music as you go through. A lot of the people who reviewed the book on Goodreads talked about how they experienced the book, and as you mentioned, songs and specific artists. They would either download the song or look up that artist and listen. And so they made it a whole, a multi-sensory experience using those different languages. So that's just beautiful. And thank you for that wonderful gift to the world, because I can't think of a better time to have such a gift than right now. Because as the book says, you're wandering through Africa on faith, but that feeling of faith being fulfilled by just the generosity and the hospitality and the welcoming, but also just the realness of just people being Africans, just being human beings with flaws, with annoying habits, without it having to be a hard luck story, but just being them is also really, really refreshing. So we're coming to the end of the live, and I've asked Lerato to prepare a reading from the book. And I asked her to pick something from the book that she feels resonates with the now and the moment that we're in. So as she's preparing that, I'm just going to read this really great comment that we've just gotten on Facebook, again from Mr. Fungai Anthony Socks. For me, the quote, "The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page," by St. Augustine, summarizes Lorato's traveling experiences and what she just shared in this discussion. Amazing indeed. And a lot of love from YouTube, My Kind of Girl, Preach, Candid, and Ubuntu again from Funga Anthony Socks. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, on the comments. Whether you catch this live later or you are still watching, please don't hesitate to post a comment in the box. We are ready to receive love from our fellow Africans here. So, Lerato, without further ado, will you give us the final word with a reading from your book?
Sure thing. I'm reading from a chapter called A Gift for My Soul. It unfolds in August 2009. Excuse me. And it's set in Bamako. This comes after, yes, it's my third trip to Bamako since I arrived in the region. And it happens over Ramadan. I'm leaving Mali the day after. So it's the night before I leave Mali for good. I'm usually happy to move to my next destination, but the thought of leaving Bamako for good fills me with profound sadness. I will no longer zoot across town to see Habib Kwate and his band Bamara on stage, nor will I be a few minutes away from his house where we spend long afternoons drinking tea while he translates some of the songs for me. I will no longer cook with Astu or brew bisap and nyamaku for Musa and Mbaye. There will be no rooftop bonding sessions with Chili at dawn when we drink cafe tuba, coffee that's flavored with cloves and salim pepper when I crochet his locks. I will no longer storm into Astu's tailor's shop with yards of pen and bazin to turn into boo-boos. Usman and his son will no longer wave hands blackened by the coal they sell at the market. I will no longer hear Nderi friend when I walk around Jikoroni Para. One of the things I used to feel and think a lot about when I lived in Mali is that all I have ever known about it, besides Timbuktu and Bamako being the capital city, excuse me, please, guys. One of the things I used to feel and think about a lot when I lived in Mali is that all I have known about it, besides Timbuktu and Bamako being the capital city where most of my favorite musicians reside, was that Mali is a poor country. Everything I read about Mali, from travelogues to news features, always finds space in the word count to mention that Mali is one of the poorest places in the world. Yet, where others only see misery and despair, I find family, unconditional love, and belonging. In Mali, I'm not moody or difficult, and I don't have an attitude. I'm understood as someone who needs her solitude and time alone to replenish daily. Just as Adama the drummer was introduced to others with the declaration that he's a joker, I'm accepted as someone who loves to withdraw into her own world and that I should not be disturbed when I'm in this space. Malians love differently, with tenderness and the utmost care of the other person's heart. To be held with love, as Malians do, is a gift for the soul.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for that gift to our souls, especially when we need it so much in this time that we're in the world. Thank you, Lerato. We have had an amazing conversation with you on this live. We have laughed. Oh my gosh, have you made us laugh? But you also brought the truth home. And thank you so much for that. To everybody who's joined us from Facebook and YouTube, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for engaging with us. If you're keen to watch, to read Vagabond, Wandering Through Africa on Faith, get it on Amazon Kindle, or you can order it from a South African bookstore and arrange, for it to come back to you. If you want to follow Lerato, look for her on Instagram with the handle Madam Africa, and look for her under the title of her book, Vagabond, Wandering Through Faith, through Africa on Faith on Facebook. And she's also Madam Africa on Twitter. It was great being with you tonight. See you again next week, Wednesday. We've got another amazing guest from South Africa, and she'll be telling us about her book. Can't wait to see you then. Have a lovely evening. Good night.